Thanks everyone for being here today. This is a webinar presented by the Behavioral Economics in Action at Rotman Partnership and the Behaviorally Informed Organizations Partnership. Before we begin, we'd like to just acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're very grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. My name is Colin West. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Rotman at the Bear Research Group, and I'm going to moderate the session today. We're delighted to have Dave, Eva, and Alex from New South Wales Behavioural Insights Unit. And before I introduce them, I'll just go over quick ground rules for the webinar. I'll introduce our speakers. They're going to give a 30 to 35-minute presentation. During the presentation, you can submit questions for the speakers using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, or you can type in questions at the end of the talk. We'll have a question and answer session where I will select questions from the Q&A and pose them to our wonderful speakers. And without any further ado, I'll introduce our speakers for today. So we have Dave Trudinger who's a director of the New South Wales Behavioural Insights Unit. Prior to joining the BIU, Dave led the Citizen Delivery Branch at the New South Wales Department of the Premier and Cabinet. His diverse career has seen him in consultancy, frontline community services, academia, and government across several Australian jurisdictions and the UK. He brings a focus on demonstrating impact, supporting frontline delivery, and empowering public service partners. Dave holds a PhD from the University of Sydney. During his PhD, included an exploration of how and why psychology was applied in a range of professions and public policy in the 20th century in Australia. We also have Eva Koromilas is a manager in the New South Wales BIU. She's a behavioral economist and has extensive experience applying behavioral insights to improve customer outcomes across multiple jurisdictions. Eva's led lots of field experiments and program redesign in service and policy areas, including COVID-safe behaviors, domestic violence, cyber bullying, drought resistance, regulatory compliance. Eva is passionate about eliminating sludge and improving the customer experience. She leads the Sludge program and Sludge audit method that's been applied across the New South Wales government. And we have Alex Galassi, who is a senior behavioral advisor for the New South Wales BIU. She's driven projects to improve customer outcomes through behavioral science, partnering with teams across the government to quantify, identify, and reduce unnecessary frictions in the customer experience. She holds qualifications in rehabilitation counseling and psychology. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Colin. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the First Nations on whose land we and you are all present. So for me, near Sydney Harbour in Australia, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay respect to their elders past and present. I'd also like to express our gratitude for the really warm partnership that Bear at Rotman University has established with us and the New South Wales government, and the collaborative approach that Professor Soman and the team have taken, so thank you. There are 4 parts to our presentation today. The first is I'll introduce the why of the New South Wales Government's Behavioural Insights Unit Sludge work and the authorising context in which effort and friction in government services has become a challenge behavioural science is helping to address. Then Alex Galassi will introduce our Sludge audit method that we have built from the principles and evidence of behavioural science and the wisdom also of our service partners and customers. And then Eva Koromilas will take a step back and share with you our reflections on what we've learned and continue to learn about supporting services to eliminate sludge and apply behavioural science. And finally, we're going to end with 2 calls to action for you and hopefully some discussion. The first is we want you to share how you are using behavioural science to bust sludge in your government, your NGO, or the context in which you work, or how you could be busting sludge after you hear what we talk about. And secondly, we want you to reflect on and discuss the lessons and future research areas that we have identified, and consider conducting research with us on how behavioural science can be part of the movement to improve customer experience. So thinking about customer at the heart, like so many governments around the world, the New South Wales government is focused on ensuring citizens get the best supports they need to live healthy, safe and enriching lives. And part of the democratic impulse that I know many of you will be aware of, individuals, communities and businesses, what we call customers here, those customers expect government services to be easy, effective and trustworthy, no matter who they are, no matter where they are, or no matter what they need. So our government, the New South Wales government, has set a specific goal to be the world's most customer-centric government, and then back this up with both a customer strategy and also with 6 customer commitments or service standards for what our citizens can expect when they interact with government. Things like acting with empathy, respecting time, being easy to access. The government also set up a Central Department of Customer Service, I think the first in the world, launched some CX surveys and prepares an annual State of the Customer report, among many other activities. And it was in that context and in partnership with a range of stakeholders from across the New South Wales government that the Behavioural Insights Unit here in New South Wales started considering in depth how we could unlock the power of behavioural science to reduce effort and improve the experience of government services. So we're really driven by how behavioural science can contribute to the powerful agenda that puts customers at the heart. And we were really driven also by the very pragmatic challenge of how we could operationalise the promises and premises of behavioural science at scale with government services that are pretty busy, pretty time limited, and not able to use some of the traditional tools of behavioural science. So we needed a fresh approach and a lot of humility, I think, in listening to service owners and customers, and a willingness to experiment. And some of the typical lenses that we've applied just generally are on the slide in front of you today. But in the next 25 minutes, we want to share with you some of the journey that we're on. And we know we've got a long way to go as well. And before I hand over to Alex to introduce our method, I just wanted to end with a few examples of what our work has meant to customers. So on the left-hand side, you can see some of our outputs. We're accelerating the number of audits that we're doing. We're connecting with our public service partners and learning more about how to bust sludge. But on the right-hand side, you can see some of the tangible impacts that our partners have achieved. And behind each of those data points there, you can see, for example, time saved in an interaction, or reduced follow-up calls, or increased access to services. Behind those data points and those achievements, it's really important to remember there's a life that's better served by government. There's a family with more time to spend on what they really want. There's a service better meeting someone's needs. And it's those tangible impacts on the customer and those tangible impacts on people in New South Wales that really motivate us and challenge us to think about how to make behavioural science and sludge more effective. So with those customer impacts and that context in mind, I'm going to hand over to Alex Galassi to share a little bit with you about our method. Alex.
Great, thanks Dave. So before I do jump into the method though, I do want to do a really quick recap on how we define sludge in the New South Wales government. So as behavioural scientists, I'm sure we're all aware of the term nudge. It's the changes to the choice architecture that make things easier. Now we can kind of characterise sludge as nudge's evil cousin that makes things harder. And in fact, Professor Cass Sunstein says that sludge are the excessive or unjustified frictions that make things more difficult. And I think what's important about that is that they are excessive and unjustified. So we don't characterise all frictions as being sludge, rather it's those things that don't need to be there and that make things more difficult. Now some sludge is deliberate, and we tend to see this sludge in the private sector, where sludge is introduced for the economic benefit of the organisation who has it there. So considering things like subscription models that are really easy to get into, but can be really difficult to get out of. So we just give up and we continue to let our subscription roll over. Rebates that are designed so that they're very difficult to claim. They take a lot of time, and so we just don't even bother trying to get the free money that's offered to us. And then finally, product returns. So if we're getting something delivered to our house, if we want to return it, we might be faced with sludge when we have to print out a form, go to the post office. You can see here how this deliberate sludge is imposed. So we just give up and we don't even bother to do what we want to do. And Richard Thaler, we have a quote up here from him. He says that it can discourage behaviour that's in the person's best interest. In New South Wales government, though, we see that sludge is unintentional, but it is still there. So the places that we tend to see it are where information is difficult to find, so scattered across multiple different websites about one particular topic. Forms that are difficult to complete, where people need to repeat themselves, they need to answer confusing questions that include jargon. Excessive wait times, particularly where those wait times don't provide any kind of status update or where customer expectations aren't set about how long something is going to take. Or complex decision points where someone might need to make a decision that has important consequences on them, but they aren't guided through what the implications are. So perhaps they won't even bother making the decision, or they might make the decision that isn't in their best interest. Another point that I wanted to make about the definition is that sludge includes the psychological barriers that make it difficult. And we have a great quote here from Dylan, who I think encapsulates this really well when he says that sometimes the process itself is efficient, but there are outcomes of the process that make people not want to engage. And this is really where that customer experience comes into it. And when we consider things where processes where people end up feeling embarrassed, excluded, distrustful, or anxious, that's where we really see that psychological sludge come into play. And a particular point that I wanted to make on this is that point of exclusion. So processes that rely on certain resources, so processes where customers need to have the time and money to be able to engage. These kinds of processes mean that some customers are excluded. And something that we find is that it's the customers who are most subject to this type of exclusion who often would benefit most from the systems and the services from which they're excluded. So what we've done in New South Wales government is created a sludge audit method, and we've built upon the work of Professor Cass Sunstein to do this, who advocates for sludge audits as a way to protect consumers. And we've really taken this idea and run with it and tailored it to the New South Wales government context that Dave spoke about earlier. So we draw on multiple metrics to measure sludge in a really standardized way, and we do this by identifying and quantifying the time it takes customers as well as their experience. We've developed this method through research for a number of years into a range of different disciplines, some of which are mentioned on the slide here. And through our standard process, we take from metrics across the experience that a customer has. So looking at time, cost, effort, and inclusion. And with those metrics, we synthesize them by taking them through this method to identify and prioritize frictions, which allow us to then develop behaviourally informed solutions to the problems that we're finding. Now, diving into our method in a little bit more detail now, these are the 6 steps that are involved. We start off with a behavioural journey map where we map out all of the steps that a customer might need to undertake or actually does undertake to engage with a service. So we start off with the point at which they decide that they want to do this and end with the point where they actually achieve their goal. And when we speak about a behavioural journey map, it means that we're mapping out all the behaviours that they complete, including the behaviours where they might need to ask for help and even the behaviours where they drop out. We then gather inputs to help us really colour that behavioural journey map. So looking at data that we have on the customer experience and speaking to customers to understand what they're going through. And then that allows us to complete the 2 steps of the sludge audit itself, which include the time audit and the customer experience audit. Through the time audit, we estimate the time each of the steps we've mapped takes. And through the customer experience audit, we rate what the customer experience looks like at each of the steps we've mapped out as well. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. With behavioural analysis, what we do is we look back at the outputs of the sludge audit to identify the points in the process that are most sludgy and detract from the customer experience most and perhaps lead to the greatest drop-off in customers. With those frictions prioritised, we're then able to develop behaviourally informed solutions, which we then implement. And then the really great thing about the sludge audit is that with those solutions implemented, we can then conduct a follow-up sludge audit a little while later to measure the process improvements. So key to that sludge audit process that I mentioned is the customer experience audit. And this is where we rate what the customer experience looks like across the different behaviours and the different interactions that the customer might have with our service. And we do this using our sludge scales, which are channel-based rating rubrics we use to measure the experience across a range of different types of interactions. So you can see them in the large box on the screen here, and you can see that they relate to these really common types of government channels. So you've got making a decision, gathering documents. Say, for example, you were auditing a process where a customer did need to make a decision, you would refer to the sludge scale for making a decision and use that to rate the customer experience at that particular point. In addition to these channel-based scales, we have access and equity checks to measure things like inclusion. This is what a sludge scale looks like. So diving in even deeper now, this is a sludge scale for form design. You can see that with the sludge scale, we have 3 rating questions for this particular sludge scale, which asks the user of the sludge audit to rate what their form looks like against this rating rubric. So they would select anything from very difficult all the way down to easy. If the user wanted a little bit more information about what they're rating against, they can use these more expanded explanations about what a difficult looks like, what a somewhat easy looks like, and what an easy looks like. So now I'm going to show you a case study to bring it to life a little bit. This is actually one of the first sludge audits that we did when we were piloting our method. And we ran this sludge audit on the process of applying for a home builder's license. And we ran this with New South Wales Fair Trading. Now, what we found was that on average, it was taking around 26 hours to apply for a license. And this includes all of the active hours. So it's not as though it took just over a day. It was that across the period that the person was spending around 26 hours. We also found that around a quarter of applicants needed follow-up. So they submitted their application incorrectly or they needed a follow-up and a back and forth with Fair Trading. So we looked a bit deeper into the results of our sludge audit, and what we found was that people were spending around 10 hours just collating the documents that they needed to be able to submit their application. Now, when we consider that a quarter of people had made mistakes and needed follow-up, this 10 hours is obviously a bit of an issue and perhaps a little bit of a source of sludge. So we identified an opportunity to simplify the letter that explained what the requirements were. And through simplifying this letter, we found that it correlated with a 32% drop in phone calls from customers who would otherwise have needed to call to clarify the requirements of their application. And with the sludge audit, because we're able to quantify through the cost to the customer and the time to the customer, we were able to then estimate that meant approximately 3,000 more builders receiving their licenses quicker per year. And it also represented an $80,000 savings to government per year. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of the journey that we've been on with our sludge audit method and the impact it's having. Now I'm going to hand over to Eva, who's going to give some background about why we think this has worked effectively in New South Wales and some of the conditions we think are perfect for sludge reduction.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. So we've been on this sludge journey for a little while now, and I thought that this session could be a really good opportunity to share some of the things that we've learned along the way for those of you that might be starting out on your sludge journey, but also to invite feedback for those of you that might already be on that journey as well, because we'd love to share experiences. In terms of how you might approach sludge reduction in your organisation, I think there's really 3 key elements that we need to think about. The first is, what method are you going to use? The second is, how are you going to apply it? And the third is, what's the environmental conditions that you need to really sustain it? So what I'm going to do now is just going to go through each of those in a little bit more detail. Firstly, on the method, so look, you're going to need a way to find the sludge, right? And typically when we're in a kind of an exploration or understand phase of a project, we do this by looking at, what data have we got available? Is there admin data? Do we have customer data? Can we get more data? Look at the literature if it's for a BI project. We talk to staff. The challenge we've found with working on sludge problems, though, is that these traditional data sources just aren't going to give you the full picture. With sludge, there's just too many factors to think about. you can't really just rely on feedback to cover all our bases, because it can be a very sort of subjective process. So what we've found work for us is having these kind of clear assessment criteria that tell us what good should look like for any type of interaction someone might have with government at that interaction level. So and according to the channel that they're using. And what that allows us to do when we're trying to figure out where to focus on and where the problems are, it allows us to have a criteria that we're measuring that interaction against. So we're not just relying on the customer to give us feedback or hope that this stuff just comes up through our investigations. We've actually know in advance what we need to be looking for, and we're essentially almost like a checklist, seeing if those conditions are there. And that means that we can be a lot more comprehensive and really uncover a lot of that invisible sludge. Like the example that Alex just used then about the home building audit, that figure about 10 hours, tradies spending 10 hours just looking for the paperwork and collating the paperwork for their form. We had already done a lot of customer research, or the team had already done a lot of customer research to understand and to get feedback from customers on the problem. None of that had never come up, even though it was such a significant amount of sludge, but it just hadn't come up because other things took priority when they were collating the feedback. So what we've found with having really kind of clear assessment criteria is that you can really uncover a lot of that invisible sludge that you can otherwise miss through kind of traditional sort of understand type processes. The next one I just want to make on this slide is about measuring impact. And typically in behavioural insights, we know that RCTs are our favoured method of evaluation. But for us, look, in Sludge, it's just not going to be practical, really. Look, when we're trying to look at a whole process, the scale of the problem is just too big. And if you want to be able to measure things using an RCT, well, it's going to become a very slow process because you've got to isolate one change at a time, and there's a lot of work involved. So it's not feasible or practical for a Sludge type setting. What we've found works is a Sludge audit. That's why we're big fans of doing Sludge audits. It is a before and after measure, but what it allows us to do is it creates a baseline that then we can compare against later. And if there are particular aspects that we want to test, then we can do things like A/B tests to test particular changes that we care about, or we're not sure exactly what might be the best approach to address that particular sludge. Now, moving on to application. Often if you're doing sludge reduction, you're probably in a BI team and you're not the process owner. So what you need to be doing is engaging with teams that do the sludge reduction to work with you or alongside you. And in our experience, often the people who are seeing the sludge, people in those teams, they're not actually always the ones that are empowered to fix the sludge. And that's a challenge, but for us, it was also an opportunity, because what it meant was that, you know, rather than sort of trying to look at, okay, well, how are we going to engage the, you know, the important decision makers to get them on board, we thought, well, look, actually, how can we leverage these champions that are already there that want to fix these processes? And so one of the ways that we did that was we started to host sludgeathons. And essentially what that involved was doing a grassroots appeal, going through channels like Yammer, which is like the Microsoft version of Facebook, Twitter, going through those channels and essentially doing like a sludge amnesty and getting staff to self-nominate where they've seen sludge in their processes. And if they want to work with us on it, they put their hand up. And what that meant is we got so much engagement, so much interest from across the sector to work with us. And it was really great because then we were able to tap into this existing this existing resource that we didn't know existed before. People who really want to work and fix these projects, but they're not necessarily in the roles that not necessarily in process improvement type roles. So the sludgeathons were a really great way for us to be able to engage these champions, and we've had some really, really good outcomes from that. The second point I wanted to make here is about making it easy. So of course, if you're going to do sludge reduction, you really want to make sure that you're making it as sludge free as possible. So on the next slide, I can show you we've created a sludge toolkit. So that's one way that we're doing that to make it easy. Our toolkit's got like a web app for doing a sludge audit. There's also guides, there's the assessment scales that Alex was talking about that have all the criteria that we use when we're doing the sludge audit. We've got templates for doing things like sludge audit, journey maps and gathering data. We've actually published some of these online, and we've got our website link at the end, and there's some more that will be published over the next few months as well. And then in terms of the sludgeathons, we've done a couple of sludgeathons so far. Just on the next slide, I think the one after, we've got we've done a couple of sludge-a-thons so far where we've covered, where we've had participants from all across the sector who have participated and have gone through a rapid design process to solve the sludge in their processes. Finally, the environment. So the first point that I've got here is about supporting the case for change. So some of the feedback that we've gotten from the CX teams who have worked on our method or used our method on their processes is that the sludge audit really gives them a way to quantify the sludge that they're seeing in their process. And this has really been key to influencing decision making. So what is the difference between people saying, okay, we've got this form, people are finding it hard to fill in, or it's taking too long, versus saying, we've got this form, it's taking people this amount of time to find the documents, it's taking this amount of time to fill it in, they're having these issues with navigation. Just being very, very specific and being able to quantify it. It provides a language that people can use to be able to talk about the sludge that they're seeing. Secondly, on culture. So for us, we talk a lot about having a customer-centric culture. And one of the things that when I think about a culture, I don't see it as one big kind of homogenous thing. I really just see it as a collection of micro behaviors. And what we're trying to do when we're trying to influence a culture is to try and work out what are the target behaviors, what do we actually want people to do to contribute to this customer-centric mindset and culture. And to do that, what we've done is really try to isolate those things. So thinking about what are the different roles people have in an organisation. A lot of people are not necessarily in roles that are focused on customer improvement, but what they're doing is they are but they've got a lot of influence and things that they can be doing to be customer centric in their roles. So is it, are they putting the customer need ahead of the business need? Are they listening to customers? Are they actively seeking feedback? When they're in meetings, what kind of questions are they asking? Do they know what to ask? Do they know how to take a customer centric view on a particular thing? Are they building in process improvement into their project life cycles and so on? So there's a lot of different target behaviours depending on the role that you're in that we've identified to help people be able to be more customer centric in their roles. Okay, so these are 3 reflections on what we've learned in supporting services to eliminate sludge, and I'm keen to get any feedback from those of you that have also been doing work in sludge reduction. I'm going to hand over back to Dave now, who's going to close out our presentation ahead of some questions and discussion. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you so much, Eva. We had a little bit of a slide sharing drama here, but I think we're possibly back on track. If I can move to the next screen. Look, I just wanted to, we wanted to recap a little bit on where we've been and what we've done in this presentation. So I introduced you to the context in which we're working, the New South Wales Government is working. Alex then took you through both the definition and meaning of sludge and also then shared with you some of our sludge method and the approach that we take to doing sludge audits. And then Eva has walked you through a really fantastic overview of some of the reflections and learnings that we've had in developing and presenting the sludge audit method. We started with sharing with you 2 possible calls to action. The first one was, we want you to share now, but also with us directly in the future, as I know many people are listening to this on a recording. We wanted you to share with us how you're using behavioural insights and behavioural science to bust sludge in your government, NGO or other context, or how you could learn from and apply the method that we have been exploring. So that's one really key call to action we wanted you to take, and also use the discussion with Colin in a few minutes to ask us any questions around. And then secondly, building on those amazing reflections from Eva, we were really keen to open up an opportunity to reflect on and discuss some of the possible future research areas that you might be interested in exploring either with us or in your own fields to support the identification, elimination of sludge and learning about some of the key elements of it. So just to take one example that's on that slide in front of you, and to pick up a couple of threads from what Eva has said and what Alex said, we're really interested in the distribution, what we call the distributional impacts of sludge. So the recognition that often it's the people who need the government services the most, who've experienced the most barriers or challenges to accessing those government services because of sludge. So we're really interested in exploring the equity and inclusion consequences of that. And I know Colin's work, for example, on time poverty, which we might talk about in a second, is a really interesting linchpin there to thinking through how sludge impacts very differently on different cohorts in the population and what we can do about it. But I leave that with you just as a taster for what could be some wider collaborations with you in researching and exploring sludge and busting sludge. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time and engagement this morning. And Colin, over to you in terms of questions and further discussion.
Wonderful. Thanks for the presentation there. So if anybody wants to chime in with questions, I'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A, but I'll kick things off. And one thing that I was curious about how you thought about this was sometimes sludge, it builds up for a reason. We need to target government programs. People hate what we might call inclusion errors. Think of, food stamps in the US or different types of poverty alleviation programs. When a richer household gets included, people are up in arms about that. So how do you think about weighing reducing sludge versus maybe this could lead to a few more inclusion errors, that these targeting methods, for something like Medicaid, they're long, sometimes for a bit of a reason. So how do you think about the trade-offs there?
Eva, did you want to pick up this one? I'm happy
sorry, my mouse wasn't moving. Sorry about that. Yeah, look, I think that this has been a big priority for us in terms of where we want to go next with our kind of slide, our focus for this year. We're really interested in making sure that we're targeting our sludge efforts to the people who need it most. And so for us, that's really about trying to really understand exactly how those inclusion factors manifest and what it means, and then being able to really focus the sludge reduction around that.
When you think about cost benefit analyses, that's one way to justify, spending money on reducing sludge. We here on this call probably all recognize the really harmful effects of sludge, but somebody who hasn't thought about this might say, well, you're just reducing the paperwork. You're going to spend all this time and money and effort just to reduce the paperwork a little bit. How do you think about demonstrating kind of the value? And the typical method is often putting this into a empirical cost benefit analysis.
Yeah, well, I think there's a real responsibility on government, if we're putting an impost on people to engage with us, that we're really respectful about their time and about and minimizing that, because there's an opportunity cost. Any time that they're spending on a government process is time that they could be spending with their families, with doing their work. I mean, one of the things that's been really great with the sludge audit is being able to actually quantify what the cost is for, say, for example, a tradesperson who would otherwise be working if they didn't have to spend time on our process. And so I think, yeah, it might not, and this is why I think quantifying it is so important, right? Because it might not seem like a big deal, but when you add it up and you aggregate it across so many different people who are going through this process, it amounts to a lot. And I really think that as a government, we have a duty to really minimise the impost that we're having on citizens.
It's a really great question, Colin, and one of the motivating reasons for why we thought about the sludge audit as a process was really using that behavioural smarts thinking about, well, how do you make it super easy for services to do that assessment? So in the customer experience space, there's a lot of different tools and techniques for for assessing customer experience. But how do you build a very systematic and easy to apply methodology that then reduces the friction costs for the service who's doing that audit? One of the points that I love that Eva made earlier is that challenge that we have of whenever we do work to bust sludge, we have to make sure as behavioural scientists and as a team advocating this, that everything that we do has to be sludge free. So when we run seminars and do calls for registration to do sludge-a-thons and so on, we have to make sure that the teams that are applying to do it have the easiest possible experience. So it sets a really high bar for us, but it's a really great one. So I think that's one of the ways in which we really focus on ensuring for services, a sludge audit is really cost effective because it's systematic, it's step through, there's easy tools to apply. And I guess that's a challenge point that we always try and address.
We've got a couple of good questions in the Q&A here that I'll relay. John McConnell has a couple questions. One was just a little bit more detail on the team that does these sludge auditors. Can you just maybe give us a little bit more detail? And then a quick follow-up would be, how do you talk when you're talking to a business or to a government unit that has never heard of a sludge audit before? How do you talk about the differences between a sludge audit versus kind of a traditional audit that they might be more familiar with?
Yeah, so in terms of the makeup of the team, we do have, so essentially most of our team are behavioural scientists, but we do have people who have, we bring in CX specialists on the projects that we're working on as well. So when we're partnering on projects, or say at the sludge-a-thons that we run, we have people like service designers and others that get involved. Actually, what's been really interesting for us in this process is how much we've been able to contribute to the different disciplines, and obviously we've learned from others as well. But that's been really great. So initially I wasn't sure whether or not people that are in customer experience focused roles or service designers would see a benefit in using another method. But actually a lot of the interest we've been getting, and particularly with the sludge-a-thons, has actually been from people that are working in these roles. But what we try to do to bring in those disciplines is to involve them in the projects where it's relevant. We partner with various teams on projects. At the moment we're doing a sludge audit on the application process for getting a foster carer. And we're currently working with some service designers as well on mapping that journey, because it's a really big one. So yeah, mostly behavioural scientists, and I think that the lens we bring has been really valuable in building in some of the considerations that aren't necessarily a priority for other disciplines, like focusing on the really micro behaviours and really kind of getting uncomfortably detailed about that, because often I see journey maps that are very kind of broad and don't really get into the detail, and often that's where the sludge audit lies. So for us, it's been really good to take that sort of cross-disciplinary approach. And the second question I think was about a normal audit versus a sludge audit, and that's been another thing that we were concerned about, is how people would react to the language when we initially sort of did a bit of a proof of concept, and we're taking it around to other teams and agencies to see how they felt about it. And it was really interesting that it actually did resonate. I think perhaps it's because the silliness of the word sludge combined with audit just sort of balances it out. But I think people actually like the idea of a sludge audit in that it's clear what they're getting from it, that there's someone who's going to actually go and review your process, and there's going to be some sort of analysis that's going to be done, and there's a result at the end. So for us, the terminology has actually really worked. And even though people, do initially might associate it with an accounting type audit, or given that where it's coming from and that we're applying that behavioural lens, actually I think people have received it well. I don't know if Dave wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. Absolutely. There's some great questions in the chat there. Thanks everyone. Please keep them coming in.
One quick follow-up on the sludge audits. Do you actually get to, it sounded like from what Alex was talking about, two numbers. There's like a quantity of hours wasted, and there's a kind of more psychometric scale, like a for the customer experience. So is it two numbers that you would land on at the end?
Yeah, so actually there's more. So there's a time, there's time, cost, then there's that CX score. So that's where we apply that's the 1 to 5 scale. And then we get a score for each behavior, and then an aggregate score as well. And on top of that, we also have, which isn't really quantified numerically at the moment, is we also do like a bit of an inclusion assessment. So there's a number of kind of checks that we do around the process, or prompting people to think about how inclusive the process is as well. But in terms of the kind of numbers that are spat out, it's those three.
And using those three, Lindsay Miles Pickup asked a question about, have you looked across departments? Where are the worst places? If you had to say, these are the sludgiest areas of government, do you have some benchmarks across different departments?
Yeah, I'd say we're not at that stage yet. So we've completed 40 sludge audits, and I wouldn't say that we have enough of a representative sample yet to say that. But one of the reasons why and one of the benefits of this new web tool, so we used to do our sludge audits in a very powerful spreadsheet, but now it's in a web app. We've got a lot of reporting functionality in that, so that we can do that kind of analysis. So we can really start to, and we've got all our sludge audits now inputted into that, and that'll give us the opportunity to be able to do that kind of analysis. But we're not really quite there yet in terms of having a sort of a representative picture.
And it is one of the, to link it back to our call to action, it's definitely one of the things we're really interested in exploring across jurisdictions, and getting your experience of where sludge or where customer effort and friction might be a particular challenge point in your jurisdiction, and perhaps by applying a tool similar to ours, then we can learn more about, for example, the relative impact of waiting time for different cohorts in a relatively similar, say, government process. That kind of international or interjurisdictional comparison is probably a sort of research agenda that might really be useful to explore together, and then becomes a more powerful tool for all of us to learn from.
I think another great question here, Liz Barker's asked about, how do you avoid the buildup of sludge in the first place? And I think that's a great question. I'll just add one more aspect to Liz's question there. Of, I think from behavioral economics, we know that people really hate small additional charges like surcharges. We hate paying deductibles. These things are, for financial costs, people really hate these kind of add-ons. But I think there's some asymmetry there when it comes to sludge. We don't really pay much attention to one little extra form or a few extra minutes here and there. And there can be this asymmetry where we let sludge slowly build up, and each additional small piece of sludge doesn't actually bother us that much. And then we find, a few years later, we're wasting an enormous amount of time. So have you thought about guides or principles, and this is Liz's question, about avoiding that buildup over time, and maybe taking into account this asymmetry?
Yeah, so on the asymmetry point, that is something that we've been trying to build up our evidence base around, that as far as what, for example, we agree that intuitively it does seem like a lot of channel switching is going to be more painful than just a single interaction, even if the time is the same, right? So there's a few things like that where we've got some sort of evidence base, or there's best practice around it. We do reflect that in our sludge scales. So we are trying to factor in kind of, make up for that, because the time and cost isn't going to tell us the full picture. And so being able to account for that kind of, where there's more excessive frustration or burden, that's kind of where we bring that out through the sludge scale. So you might have some process that's really quick, or a step that's really, really quick, but it's actually really burdensome for other reasons. And that's where those assessment criteria can bear that out. And then the other point about, sorry, I missed what the other part of that question was. Sorry, Colin.
It was really just about preventing the buildup in the first place.
Oh, the prevention. Yeah. So the couple of things with that, I mean, one is we're working with teams now to start to do routine sludge audits, so that we're not, we've got, so it's not just a one-off thing where you reduce the sludge and then you finish, that there's an expectation that we're going to need to keep doing it, because it is going to creep up over time, and and then creep back in and change as well as processes change. The other thing we're doing more work on now is thinking more about sludge prevention. So we're looking at how we can have a better process for mapping a process that doesn't actually exist yet, right? And thinking about that, the potential impact or how you can avoid the sludge in advance. I'd say that's probably something that we're more fresh to. So we're just really kind of starting to do that actually with that. That one of the sludge audits we're doing now falls in that bracket, but we're still kind of adapting our system to really try and be more effective, to kind of make sure that we're asking the right prompts, we're thinking about the right considerations when we're trying to prevent sludge in the first place.
And I'll add a plug here, Colin. I think I've posted in the chat there the link to to some of the resources and guides in the Sludge toolkit that's available on our website, which gives you as Eva said, gives you a really practical tools to do that preventative work based on our learning. And we'll keep revising and improving those tools over time to ensure that, there's both prevention and also remediation that can happen. So, and again, that call to action, love to learn more about what's effective in your context to reducing sludge, and again, we can build that evidence base reflected in those tools and go from there.
We have another question from Kelly Peters, my former boss. She asked about, she's got a couple questions about kind of potentially positive externalities. I wonder if you've thought about measuring these. One would be, well, if you're making it easier to get business licenses, would that help reduce some of the underground economy? And another positive externality would be trust in government. Some of these are a bit more downstream, but have you thought about some of these downstream kind of cascading effects of reducing sludge?
Yeah, it's definitely so I guess the context, going back to the context of why we hear the commitment to be the world's most customer-centric government, the work that's happening across our department with our colleagues on things like customer experience surveys that really do identify not merely effort, but also satisfaction and trust. And the relationship is complex between all of those things, but it's a very reasonable hypothesis that if you continually experience barriers to getting what you want or need from a government service, then your expectation and relationship to that government is diminished and harmed. So there's a reasonable hypothesis there. We'd love to work with people to explore that further and to really put that empirically to the test. I think the other positive externality to contemplate as well, which Eva mentioned earlier, is the productivity dividend as well. So clearly there's an experience dividend, freeing up time, and we've all learned, I think, as Cass Sunstein says really eloquently, in COVID, we all really learned the value of time and time with our friends, family, and the people that enrich our lives. But also from an economic point of view, that time in the example that was shared earlier about building licenses, people spending time looking for documents so they can get a license to then build a house is clearly for economic productivity. And again, exploring how to quantify that would be something we're really quite interested in exploring with potential partners.
Just building on a little bit, you'd mentioned the difficulties with running kind of formal RCTs, which is totally understandable, the big endeavor. Other methods that you can think about using, I wonder what you thought about that, and in particular, longitudinal tracking, right? So if you thought about, we can track people over time and see if some of these measures like trust in local government change after, if you do within subjects, and you can look at over months and before and after interactions with particular government units that may or may not have done some sludge busting, there would be a longitudinal way of getting at some causal inference. It's not a perfect RCT, but it could provide you with some more confidence that these things are having meaningful differences.
That's That is exactly where we would love to be, Colin, like without a doubt. And we've got some powerful tools in the New South Wales government in terms of listening to customers, customer voice and ratings and so on, where there is definitely those kinds of opportunities that that we would really welcome and seek to explore. But I think the underlying premise of what you just said is really spot on and animates our thinking as well in terms of what could be possible.
Simon Alperstein just added a question that is related to this. And this is something I'm very interested in because in my research, I studied time use. So measuring time, right? Difficult, arduous thing to do. You can think of things like the American Time Use Survey, which asks people to reflect on the past week, and you capture people over time. You can think of, Daniel Kahneman's work on the day reconstruction method. Have you thought about running some time use studies of your own of, say somebody is going through a business licensing process, should we do a few day reconstruction methods with them and see exactly, like at a really granular look at how they're spending their time? So I'd say one, to Simon's question and kind of my follow-on is, how do you currently measure time? Do you have some aspirations for measuring time in a more detailed way?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, we gather data from a number of sources. So sometimes there's administrative data that gives us a pretty accurate picture. Other times we'll rely on observation. We do interviews with customers. Also a lot of and also frontline staff can often speak to that as well. So at the moment, there's depending on the process, there's a number of different sources that we use that. I mean, with all of our metrics, we'd love to get to a point where we can, we've got even more sophisticated ways to measure it so that the data is more reliable. But yeah, that's something that we're, needing to develop over time as we mature our method.
Yeah, and I mean, that is a difficult thing to do. And, something like memory biases pop. If you ask people to reflect on, their process for, getting a particular license, they might forget already. So, that's, you thinking about these gold standards in measuring time it might be something really interesting for you. I want to go to one other question here that I thought was, hold on, let me just find where it is. Stephanie Mertens had asked about the time investment of running RCTs versus the confidence that you have there. Could you just follow up a little bit on how you think about the future of kind of measurement for this stuff?
Yeah, so we're at the moment, one of the things we're looking at doing, we're starting a partnership with our website team essentially to look at testing, doing more A/B test of different variations of things that are common across a lot of government interaction. So, thinking about different ways to present information or different ways to structure a form and building up, so we continue to sort of build our evidence base across on what works in that space. So we don't not do any experimenting or not look at testing. We do also work with our partners on looking at finding, particularly where there's a really kind of clear behavioural objective that we're trying to achieve by reducing the sludge. So sometimes if it's about, we're wanting to increase take up of a particular service, for example, then in those scenarios we may be interested in testing as well, and we've done that, I think. But for the most part, where customer experience is really the main objective, for us, if we'll rely on the sludge audit as our primary method of evaluation, and if there is an opportunity for us to test particular features or things that we're not sure about, then we'll see what where the technology allows us. We'll try and do some sort of A/B test or RCT.
And we I think that challenge point really is we know a lot about what works, and I guess in a very applied context, the tool gives us insight about where the barriers are, where some of the most costly, if you like, barriers are, and actions that service designers who in actually existing services currently can take action tomorrow. And then, as Eva said, explore further, deeper reforms or barriers. So it's definitely not an either or. And it's also it's probably a really critical obligation, I guess, we have in the behavioural science community, particularly within government, to really make sure that we're leaning into the challenges that our service delivery partners have in the design of existing services that are there. So generating evidence is critically important, and also acting on what we already know is also really essential. And that's why, again, we'd really like people to contribute to the evidence base that's in, for example, those guides that are on the website that was shared earlier. And it's also why we'd really like people to contribute to building the research and evidence base around frictions in customer experience and its impact on service take-up.
I have one last question of my own for you, and then we'll wrap it up. AI for sludge reduction. Have you thought about, can we use government data to pre-fill some forms? Can we make informed guesses so that people only have to go in and edit? Have you guys thought about, if in 2, 3, 10 years down the road, a lot of government processes might be automated with AI predictions?
I can start. Look, we're lucky we work in a government that is got a very ambitious digital agenda, and I think that if there's opportunities to kind of experiment in that space or to use that, then I think that that'll be something that we could definitely explore. I can't say that we've kind of given that a lot of thought yet. I don't know whether, Dave, you want to add anything to that.
Well, look, I think one thing's clear, Colin, that neither Eva, myself, or Alex are actually real. So it's all been a AI experience. No, but seriously, look, there is a lot of work across government around both the opportunities and challenges of AI in a government context. So the New South Wales government has an AI framework. It also has an AI ethics framework as well, which I think is really crucial in that context. And in addition, our colleagues that sit adjacent to us have done a lot of work on what's called a government made easy priority, which is around ensuring that people, as much as possible, only need to tell their information once when they interact with government, with all the appropriate safeguards and securities around that, of course, but just to really, if there really is that desire to minimize sludge. Yeah.
Thank you so much. With that, we'll wrap up. So I'd like to thank Dave and Eva and Alex for their presentation today. A recording of the webinar will be available on the BEAR website. There's a tab labeled events there. And our next webinar will be April 19th with Lynn Fay and Dan Bartels from the Chicago Booth School. And with that, I'll just say thank you to our panelists today.
Thanks, Colin. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, everybody.